Hello and welcome today to our ICE71 Distinguished Series live webcast with Chris Roberts. And the topic today is hacking sheep, ships, space stations, and everything in between. I can't take credit for that. Chris is the one that came up with that. And Chris is the Chief Security Strategist at Ativo Networks. So today I'll be your moderator, and I'm Lyndon Nguyen Schindler. I'm the program head here at ICE71. In Singapore, we love acronyms. So ICE71 stands for Innovation Cybersecurity Ecosystem at Block 71. And we're the region's first cybersecurity entrepreneur hub, founded by Singtel Innovate, which is the VC arm of the leading telco Singtel, and NUS Enterprise, which is the entrepreneurial arm of the leading university, National University of Singapore. So today, we're excited to bring you a live webcast with Chris Roberts, and he's with Ativo Networks, who they're one of our companies in our ICE71 Scale Landing Pad program. So we're very excited to have him here today, coming to us all the way from Colorado. Unfortunately, we've been working for almost a year to get you here to Singapore to talk to our ICE community. Unfortunately, with the state of the world, doing a live webcast is the next best thing.
It's about as good as it's going to get at the moment, isn't it? At least for, if lockdown comes off before the end of the year, I'll be happily surprised. Although I think it depends what country. If you have to deal with the lunatic that we have in charge, it'd be off like this week. He'd be like, oh, everybody can go out and go play. Whereas there are other countries that are maybe like, let's be a little bit more sensible about this and maybe social distance for the next 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. So I as much as we wish that you could be here live with us, we're so happy that you're here with us now, talking to the entire spectrum, right, of our cybersecurity ecosystem here in Singapore. We have students, we have startups, we have corporates with CISOs, we have investors, we have representatives from government agencies. So the whole spectrum of the cybersecurity ecosystem here. And so everyone's been very excited to hear you speak. We are too. This is our best event ever.
No, I'm just me. We haven't talked about this. We have to have this conversation. The whole, as well as I do. It drives me nuts, and people see it. I do a bunch of stuff on LinkedIn and everything else, and I really. I don't like being called anything else other than just me. That whole you're this and a superstar. Oh, I cringe the hell out of it.
Oh shoot! Because I was just going to call you one of the world's foremost experts on counter threat intelligence and vulnerability research.
Do you know what? I've done crazy stuff. Let's just put it that way, on all sorts of interesting things on this planet. Yeah, okay. As we will have conversations. Yeah, no, I've obviously been messing around with threat intel and all sorts of other interesting stuff for more years than I care to think of.
All right. Well, we'll just let people know, for those who don't know, a bit about your background. You've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years. You also been credentialed in many of the top IT and information security disciplines. Like you said, you've, let's call it, been on a lot of hacking adventures. Like we said, like the title mentions,
with mixed results,
space stations and everything. And these days you're involved in both technical and strategic discussions with clients across the spectrum of industries, including but not limited to maturity risk and how to affect change. Right. Yeah. So we're so happy to welcome you to our live webcast. And I just want to, mention a few housekeeping issues to the attendees. If you have any questions along the way while we're having a conversation with Chris for the first 30 minutes or so, please feel free to use that Q&A button down below. And you can ask the questions, and we'll start, compiling a list of potential questions that Chris will be answering later on in the session. What else? If you have to leave the webcast for any reason, you can continue to follow us live on Facebook at facebook.com/I71. And you can also PM us your inquiries via Facebook or LinkedIn, or just search for I71 and you can click to any of our social media channels. So
am I allowed to admit that I don't have a Facebook account in my name?
Okay.
I've got
So no,
several Facebook accounts, but nothing's in actually my
so
name.
I
It's
think that's par for the course, right? We expect that. I mean, when
I
Chris
know,
logged
yeah.
into Zoom, we asked him, can you log in with your real name so that we know who to let in and who to make a panelist speaker? And he didn't. And so we were trying to guess which of these participants is him, because
I got kicked out. I came straight in, and I'm like and I got kicked back out. I'm like, oh yeah, I had to use my proper name, didn't I? Totally forgot
yeah.
about it.
Yeah,
Totally
but that's
forgot about it.
good. So you have a fake name that you use online and in
Several.
person. So that's good. We know
Yeah.
you're cyber secure and physically secure because you have huge 120-pound dogs. Yeah, so we have people tuning in today. Like they've registered from all over the world. We have people from over 25 countries that have registered. So we have Australia, Switzerland, New Zealand, Indonesia, South
Oh, there's
Africa,
people from New Zealand?
Germany, yes, Israel,
Damn
Costa
it.
Rica, Taiwan, Japan, and more. So everyone here is really excited to hear all your stories and insights that you have. So let's jump straight in, shall we?
Go for it.
Okay, so look, we've established you've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years. So what got you started in this sector, and what was your earliest hacking experience?
Oh man. So let's see. So I got into this industry. I mean, I was young. So the first computer I have, I actually went out and bought another one. So it's an old
Wow.
ZX80. And for those of you that remember those days, in other words, you have to have more gray hair than probably a lot of folks. The ZX80 was, I mean, I had that in literally 1980. 1980, 1981 is when I got that thing. It had a whole 4K of memory. That was it. That's all you had to play with. Nothing else. So it was all command line. It was all just fun and learning what this thing could actually do. We built joysticks for it. We built all sorts of fun stuff for it. I took a break. I was at a boarding school for less than the year. Boarding school and I didn't get on with each other. Surprise, surprise. But then started messing around. I was like 13, 14 years old. And I got it was an Atari, one of the old 6800s. So, I mean, we're going back to like, the cartridge days and also the cassette days. And I hated losing at the games. I was playing the early days of like poker and stuff like that. And I hated losing. So I would load the programs up, error them out, drop them out to the command line and see how they actually worked. And then I'd load up a basic shell and just really start to figure the code out from there. And so at the time when my father was still around, he would co-play the game and would, win some and lose some. I'd play the game. I'd end up like a trillionaire after 20 minutes of playing, just purely because I'd rehacked the system. So that got me started. And then 14, 15 years old, my parents went their separate ways and didn't sit very well with me. So that was probably the hacking thing. My father had me arrested when I was basically 14, 15 years old. Yeah, I hacked into the bank, moved
Oh,
all the money from his account into an account in my
wow.
name. So master criminal that I was at that
Okay,
age.
at
Yeah,
14
didn't
and
think about it.
15. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Modem
I was
dial-up,
I,
modems dial-up.
I was going to ask you if you're classically trained, whatever that means, or if you're self-taught then.
A lot of self-taught, a ton of it. But I mean, if you think about it, back in those days, so we're going back, mid 1980s into the 1990s side of things. A lot of it was on bulletin boards, on systems. So I came out of the UK and a bunch of teams out of the UK and I learned a lot from there. I took a break when I was about 18 and went into the military for a period of time and did absolutely nothing to do with this at all in the military. Came out of the military and did reserves and various other things and got back into it again. And I got yelled at a few more times.
Yeah. But I
Yeah.
mean, but that gave you like more insight into how you could help them later as a white hat.
Yeah, in hindsight, that's what it was doing. But at the time, I mean, I was young. I mean, I was, when I came back out of the military, actually, even before I went in, so I mean, I was still messing around with computers when I was 16, 17. And because for whatever reason, it made a lot of sense to me. I remember walking into my boss's office. So imagine this today. Imagine walking into your boss's office. In one hand, you've got an output from the database, the HR database of exactly what everybody makes. And you're like, so I'm training all these people. I'm doing all this. Why am I getting paid less than these people? And the next question was like, well, so how do you know that? Well, I got into the database and I did, and yeah, that didn't go very well. But, in hindsight, when you think about it, it has led up to a lot of it these days, which is where you try to help people understand, look, here are the issues and problems. Let us help you not only identify them, but how do we actually help you reduce the risk on them, potentially solve them, or put controls around them so that that risk isn't so great.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, I think that, we have the whole spectrum of the cybersecurity ecosystem here. And so we also have students, right? Aspiring cybersecurity, people here in the audience. And so can you share, like, what do you think nowadays, like, how can they get, their foot in the door in cybersecurity? What should they be doing?
I think a lot of it. So a very good friend of mine, like Chris Nickerson, who does amazing stuff out with like human engineering and social, and is like one of the founders of B-Sides. He and I over the years have talked a lot about this to various people. So we've got a bunch of like LinkedIn posts out there that say, look, if you're getting into this industry, here's things to do. And I think part of it is the tough part for a lot of companies is, how do you rate this resume that's in front of you? Or how do you rate this person that's coming to you? And for us, a lot of it is, okay, how involved are they in the community? So if I'm looking at somebody who's like brand new, I don't care about the qualifications. I don't care about some certain things. There's certain stuff I do care about, and we'll talk about that in a sec. What I care about is what they think and how they feel and how they can demonstrate it. So if they want to get into red teaming or blue team, have they built their own machine at home? Have they figured out how things work? Have they figured out how to reverse? Have they broken things to be able to then figure out how to repair them? And that's it. And there's so much of that ability out there, whether you use like Cybery or use the guys over at Wiser for doing training, or whether you just go out there and build your own virtual machines on a computer. I mean, people, you can go buy an Arduino for 20 or 30 US dollars, and that's a good basis enough to understand how to do pen testing and assessments and what frequencies are and what networks are. So to me, a lot of it is, if you haven't got the 3 years of experience, how much time have you taken personally and yourself to learn the skills? Have you gone out and pestered me on LinkedIn? Have you talked to the community? Have you gotten involved in the stuff that you guys are doing as well? Have you just gone out there and said, look, how can I help? How can I volunteer my time? Can I do work for like Innocent Lives Foundation? Can I be part of the B-Sides community? Can I volunteer? So that, to a lot of us, counts for much, much more than, hey, I got a CEH or a CISSP or any of that kind of rubbish.
Okay.
The caveat to that one, if you're coming in a blue teaming or red teaming, some of the biggest skills that you have to come in with these days, especially, is the communication skills. So definitely verbal and written communication skills. So if you're coming in and going, hey, I want a pen test, well, that's great. We know everything can be broken. How do you fix it? How do you explain it to a client, either orally or actually writing a report effectively enough so that that message gets across? And then the collaboration side of it, that's gone are the day, well, says the guy sitting in his basement in the dark. Yeah, all right, time out on that one. Almost gone are the days of the individual in their basement, heads down, breaking shit. It's much more about collaboration these days.
Okay.
And so
I think that's really interesting, right? Because I think, that touches on with the students and how they get in, but I think it also is relevant to CISOs, right? And how they talk to the board.
Absolutely.
Or the communication skills these days that are necessary.
Well, it's communication up and down. And this is one of the biggest frustrations I have with our own industry, is we have not been effective at communicating things. We've been really good at talking. We've been good at coming to, people who maybe don't understand our industry, and we've used acronyms. You said about how much, Singapore likes its acronyms. Well, let's talk about our industry. Good grief, the amount of bloody acronyms that we use. So people outside of our industry go, what the hell are you talking about? How can you explain security in a language I need to understand? Which is where you talk about risk and where you basically put it into human terms. And to your point, it doesn't matter if it's the CEO or the CISO trying to explain it to leadership about risk reduction, about mitigation controls and compliance and regulations and everything else, or if it's somebody on a technology level explaining to an end user why we have to have the discussion about passwords and how effectively it's meant to keep you safe. Nothing to do with security. It's keeping you safe. And here's all the logical reasons. And if I teach you, you can teach your family. So a very different approach that we've not been good at doing.
Hmm. So I guess that segues nicely into then your role at a TiVo Networks, right? So I mentioned earlier, TiVo Networks is one of our I-71 scale companies in our landing pad, and they work with deception technology.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that, about your role as the chief security strategist, and
Yeah.
how you maybe dealt with the board and how you talk to them and communicate with them?
Yeah, that's been an interesting journey. We'll just leave it at that, shall we? So here's a couple of things. So deception is simple. Let's explain deception in English. It's lying. How can I, as a technology, effectively lie to somebody who's trying to break into these systems? Because if you think about deception these days, it's taking one computer and maybe making another one next to it, or it's taking one process or a port or a file or a document or a share or anything else that you could build a replica of and putting it out there. And as an attacker, the better that the system lies to me, the more chance I have of interacting with it effectively and thereby triggering alerts, getting into systems. So it probably drives the marketing people absolutely around the pole, but I don't care. But if you really think about it, it's you're building a system to lie to anybody that's trying to break in. And you've got to do it the best you possibly can. Or you camouflage. The other way of looking at it is camouflage. If you want to take the military term, it's building an architecture that camouflages itself effectively. And some of the kind of cool stuff that we're building at the technology level these days almost acts as the butler. If an attacker gets onto your computer and goes, "Hey, I want active credentials. Can you give me your credentials?" Normally the system just goes, "Here's the credentials." If you've got a deceptive system, what happens is as that request comes in from the attacker, the deceptive system goes, "Absolutely, I'll give you credentials," but
Okay.
gives you deceptive credentials. So it protects the Active Directory, and it really gets in between the conversation and acts as a very civilized. I'm civilized, of course I'll give you them. Pretends it's AD, pretends it's the thing, camouflages itself, hands credentials, and these hackers like, "Hey, this is great." And all of a sudden the alarm bells go off everywhere if anybody's paying attention.
So what's the difference between deception and the honeypot?
Honeypot is our old friend from 10, 15, 20 years ago. Lance Spitzner obviously being one of the more infamous individuals who pioneered that space very, very effectively. If you think of deception, I obviously, part of my background is I used to work for a Calvio, and a Calvio was like, yeah, well, it's deception 2.0. But if you think about it, deception really is trying to help the blue team. So it's trying to help the defensive teams. Its job is not just to sit there and alert or to sit there and look. It's to interact, it's to work effectively, and really to give the blue team some more teeth. Because let's face it, they've not been on the winning side for quite some years, unfortunately.
Okay. I guess, one of the things that then we're interested in as you're looking at deception and you're, lying to people. So
Yeah.
how have you kind of used that in other aspects in your life and career, in your hacking adventures, we'll call them? Like we talked about how you're what is it, sheep,
Oh yeah,
space
sheep,
station,
cows, and all sorts of
cows,
interesting
right?
stuff. Yeah, cows was fun. Oh my gosh, cows was hilarious. So for those of you that are not US based, the US is a big ass bloody country. I mean, it's stupidly big. And so you can drive for a day especially in Colorado. I mean, we're right in the middle of the darn thing. So you can drive for a day or two in pretty much almost any direction and still be, for the most part, it's in the US. Now, there's definitely some interesting parts of the US and long cultural conversation on that one. But I was driving from Colorado. I was driving north. I was actually heading to a place called Yellowstone,
Yeah.
which is just, if you ever get the chance to get over here, go to Rocky Mountain National Park and go to Yellowstone. Just absolutely amazing. It's a caldera, and it's just it was just freaking huge, massive super volcano underground that's got this really great big slab on top of it, and it wants to blow. You can just tell the damn thing wants to blow because the ground above it is Yellowstone and the Tetons, and you've got all these amazing pools and rock pools and lava and all sorts of just amazing fun stuff. And so I was driving up there and driving back and stuff like that. And normally when I drive one of the cars, I've got like a sensor system that's just keeping an eye on networks around me just to see what's around and make friends with them, especially fun with cars. And so I'm driving along this middle of bloody Wyoming, which is like wide open middle of nowhere. You can see from horizon to horizon almost. And this thing's just going off and the sensor keeps going off. And I'm like, there's nothing here. I don't know, there's nothing. And I'm like, I pulled over and I'm like, okay, this is driving me nuts. And I'm looking around and there's these cows in the field. And I'm like, okay. So I start looking and I realize that a lot of the cows are wearing pedometers and RFID tags on the ears. And I'm like, well, this could be fun. So I hop over the fence and start trying to make friends with a cow in the middle of Wyoming, which is not a smart thing to do. They're big. I mean, they're big things. And so I'm trying to make friends with this damn thing to figure out what the hell it's actually wearing. And I've got my sensor system in one hand and I'm like following this cow around as I'm looking at the sensors, trying to hack the damn system. So I get back in the car, do a whole bunch of research when I get back to Colorado, realize what they're wearing. And they're wearing basically pedometers. Because what's happening, because the land is so big, the farmer, A, has to figure out where his herd is. And B, they're doing a lot to keep the health of the herd. So if the cow's moving and if it's not moving and where it's moving, all these other kind of crazy things. I'm like, well, this is cool. So then I get a couple and download it and reverse engineer it. And I'm like, it's a default ID and password on this bloody database. I mean, this thing is everywhere, like US, Europe, and all over the place. I'm like, I shouldn't. I'm going to anyway. So I end up going into a couple of the databases and they've got GPS tracking and tags and stuff. So we ended up redirecting a whole bunch of the GPS tracking. So every 30 seconds, it overwrote the GPS ID with a very, very good friend of mine's house in the middle of like about 20 minutes from where I live. So at one point in time, we actually we had about 250,000 herd of cow virtually at his house, for which he was not very happy. Oh yeah, so much fun.
I mean, and that it can be important, right? Because one of our other startup companies, First Watch, they're in New Zealand. They're protecting critical infrastructure, and one of the things they're dealing with is the dairy farms, right? And so this can have a big consequences, right, for a country like New Zealand.
Well, I mean, not only that. So you take it another step further. And while I was messing around with that stuff, I started messing around with other things in the cattle, and I basically became the digital version of a cattle rustler. It was quite fun to do. And so I ended up the milking systems. Those are fun as all hell, and so back in the UK, part of me is English and part of me is Scottish, and Scotland went through a referendum like a couple of years ago, and it failed. We failed to gain independence. So, you know, kind of happy about that, but kind of not happy about that. And I'm like, sod it, I'm going to get my revenge on some of the English people by removing the milk. So I'm like, okay, how do you milk a cow? A lot of research on this one. Figured out there's these amazing like autonomous cow milking systems that are also connected to the bloody internet, because, you know, the farmer gets sold this amazing bit of machinery and goes, bug it if I know what the hell to do with it. And the person that sells it goes, oh, we'll look after it, we'll remote into it, and we'll PC anywhere into half the damn things. So I end up getting into these things, and not only are they actually milking them, but they're also looking at the chemicals. So they're actually working out what chemicals this cow needs to keep it going and producing milk and all the stuff. And so you can do all sorts of interesting stuff if you can adjust the chemical balances of what they're feeding the cows. So you can have, basically, Colorado, you can have stoned cows. You can do all sorts of you can do some really, really nasty things with these. And again, yeah, it's all sitting out on the bloody internet. So yeah, basically did cow rustling, did herd rustling. And then in the herding areas, they've got these amazing, massive, like Roomba type machines. You know, the iRobot Roombas.
Yeah,
they've got these amazing, massive Roombas, and they've got feeders on some of them, and they've got cleaners on other ones. So ended up grabbing the code off of GitHub. You know, again, this is one of the problems. Companies are like, oh, we need to build this new product, and we're going to open source, and we're going to put it up on GitHub. And then people like me come along and go, so I grabbed the code from GitHub, rewrote a bunch of the code using like an open GPS theory. And so every 12 hours, one of these machines there were a bunch of them I ended up messing around with in like Oregon and Wyoming and a few other states. Every 12 hours, this machine would stop exactly what it was doing and would line dance for 30 seconds. So it would go forward a couple of paces, go sideways, go back, go forward. It was square dance, line dance. It was square dance. And then it would go back after 30 seconds and just keep on going. It was just pure Fun. I got it up to their SFTP server, signed the self-signed cert, and just distributed it to a bunch of their systems. Yeah, much fun.
I mean, so you're doing this like for fun, and
Oh
you're
yeah.
messing with the cows, making them dance, making them show
Yep.
up at people's houses. But what about like, okay, like Singapore, for example, right?
Yeah.
Singapore is a major maritime hub. Okay.
Oh yeah.
The shipping, right? It's one of the busiest ports in the world. Oh gosh, I don't know. What are your
Ships are
thoughts into
fun.
that?
Oh my ships. So I've obviously been banned on quite a number of airlines for a variety of reasons. We messed with cars back in, I don't know, 2009, 10, 11. And then Jesse and I messed with tractors. We figured out how to stop tractors. So we've had fun. We've basically been scaling up. And then about two and a half years ago, I don't know what the heck. I was over in Turkey. Amazing time hanging out with some just amazing folks over in Turkey. There's a company over there called Innovera, freaking brilliant crew out there. And the couple of the guys out there are fantastic. Anyway, got hanging out with those guys. And I'm watching these ships. I mean, like every 30 seconds, they're just going through it. I'm like, well, I wonder what goes on. So I started doing the research and then looked at the signals and looked at everything else and the sending. So I'm like, okay, so I go down to the quayside with basically a 4-foot antenna that I had with me because I was carrying decent gear with me. Had this antenna with me and I'm watching the ships come in and just basically joining the wireless and seeing if I can get in. And then I'm like, okay, well, that was fun, but what can I do to a ship that's in the middle of the sea? So I started looking at the VSAT systems, like the VSAT 9000 and some of the other systems that they have on these. And they're white. I mean, they are not locked down. They are not very secure. And so started doing the research and going, okay, I can get from the SAT system to navigation. What can I do from navigation? Well, I can obviously adjust charts and do all sorts of other things. What else can I do? And in some cases, because these are relatively new ships, and when you buy your multi-million-dollar ship, what happens is that ready great big engine, or those engines that get put in there, they want to do predictive maintenance. So rather than just waiting until the ship gets into port and going, oh, it's broken, in the middle of the high seas, they're pulling all these interesting stats off of this to understand heat and temperature and oil and flow and everything else. Well, those have got to go somewhere. So I just backfilled into that. And on a certain number of the cases, we managed to get into the engine management system. The more fun was into ballast. I have screenshots of me sitting on the ballast control systems, which is great. So instead of making a plane fly sideways, I can actually make a ship roll over in the middle of harbor. Not good. Tried talking to a bunch of shipping places, hasn't been fixed, can still get in. And so the challenge, we talked about this before we actually got started. The challenge on a lot of this is how do you take what you can do and then try to explain it in a responsibly disclosed manner to the companies, to an organization, to an ISACA and everybody else. And it's tough because, especially at the moment, everybody's focus is on other things. They don't want to hear about the one guy with a purple beard that can break in and turn the ships upside down. They focused on getting the ship from point A to point B, preferably with all the damn toilet roll that everybody else has started to hoard in this place. So yeah, it's there's some challenges, definitely some challenges.
Okay, so I mean, speaking of the maritime, so our neighbors next door, they're Pier 71, so they deal with startups in maritime also, and then we share obviously some startups that are doing maritime cybersecurity. But as you're talking about this, I'm trying to think about like our startups, right? We have a big startup community here, ICE71.
Yeah.
So I mean, and it's hard to get your foot in the door, right? And especially in large organizations, their legacy issues. So how can our startups, really get into, the field, get into the organizations, like start working with these organizations?
It's a good point because I'm working with another startup, like a shipping organization. In fact, the guys over at Verified, Jonathan Kempe, is just a really good friend. And I mean, the team that he's built is fantastic. And what he's done, again, it's shipping, it's all the maritime security and some actually fascinating stuff on all the shipping containers. But what he's done and what I think a lot of the startups need to do, and it's actually what I'm doing. So cards on the table. Yes, I'm with a TiVo, but obviously I'm finishing with a TiVo in a couple of weeks. So what I'm actually doing is I'm starting to work with as an advisor for a lot of organizations. And the logic there is, if you are a startup company, is to go, okay, who can I work with or who actually would have access into this company? And not only would they have access in, but how much do they know about the industry? So, perfect example, there's certain things I know in certain industries where I'm happy to come in and talk to a startup company and go, look, if you want to focus in the financial industry, these are the things you need to be able to build in effectively. With Jonah and stuff, if you're looking in the shipping industry, these are the organizations you need to be talking to. These are the companies, these are the intros. And really, it isn't all about doing it yourself. This goes back to, how do you get into this industry? You make friends. You go out, you do LinkedIn, you talk to people, you present your ideas, and you present them in forums where maybe some investors would look, maybe some of the companies that you want to actually talk to will look, or you bring those companies in and say, look, I've got an idea. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm trying to do. Can I get some advice from you? How would you react to this? What would you think about doing this? So you're not actually soliciting them for the work. You're saying, look, I want to come talk to the industry. I want to improve things. I want to make a difference. And if I want to make a difference, this is the approach I think I have. Can you help me understand if that's the right approach? Or could you help me understand if I need to change a little bit, or if I need to course correct? Or, perfect example, to give Ativa some credit. Ativa realized it does deception, and it does it really freaking well. But it doesn't do certain other things. So what they've done is they've effectively partnered with other companies. And so as a product, you don't just have to put it in and hope for the best. It integrates with other things. So again, if you're coming to the community with an amazing, crazy idea, like you said, with somebody in the agricultural industry or somebody in the shipping industry, who can I partner with? Or how can I help somebody else's process be more effective? The TiVo is part of the same reason. Our job isn't to solve all the problems. That's never going to happen. How can we help the technology you have, build it to be more effectively and reduce the risk? So don't go out there and try to solve the world, but go out there and go, how can I help others be effective? And how can I help solve some of the problems? And by the way, the only way I know what the problems are is if I bring some of those people in as advisors and trusted partners and something like that. Does that make sense?
Okay. So say you're a startup, you're looking at how can we help you solve your problems. So then I guess, maybe a great question for them would be, what are the top, one or two challenges that you see that the CISOs are facing right now? And, so that our startups can maybe get an idea of what we're looking at.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really nice one. I think there's a couple of, so part of it is visibility. So you've got several issues. You've got people who are going out there saying, okay, I can sell you endpoint. And to me, the first question that somebody should ask an organization is, do you even know how many endpoints you have? The answer is never yes. Because, your IT guys give you one idea. HR tells you how many they've issued. The help desk goes, oh, hell no, we're looking after this many. Security's like, we got this list. And they sure as hell aren't the same number. So I think part of it from a CISO's perspective is understanding the risk. Is just, where are my risks? And the flip side of that one is from a CISO's perspective, especially the bigger companies, they have, or their teams have bought so many tools and so many pieces of technology, and arguably quite a lot of it isn't being used effectively. So then it's like, okay, do I really want to add to this problem by putting in another piece of technology? Or could I look at the 4 or 5 pieces of technology you're only utilizing 30 or 40%, and how can I make those more effective? What could I bring to the table that would maybe give more visibility, or make, instead of 4 different consoles the poor blue team's got to look at, as a single unified console? Or how could I actually effectively tie together, everything I see from the endpoint through to the network, through to the system, and do, like SOAR is trying to do. You look at some of the SOAR automation technologies. How can I tie that together to be more effective, so that when I don't have enough people to look after my system, that my system itself has a level of maybe self-healing and self-capabilities built into it?
Okay.
So, the CISO's got a lot to worry about. And then obviously regulatory and compliance, but that's a huge one.
Yeah. Before I ask one of my last questions, I wanted to encourage the participants. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button that you see on the bottom of your screen. to ask your questions, and then we'll gather them up and present them to Chris after our session is done. But
there's some good ones coming up here. There's some really good ones.
Yeah. So I guess before we get into that, to give people some more time to ask their questions, just wanted to know what keeps you up at night?
Me?
Yeah.
Oy vey. Actually, what keeps me up at night most of the time is the fact I can't shut my brain down. As I put a post out on LinkedIn a month or two ago, and I'm not good. Number one, I'm a night owl, which I love, because normally this time of night is like my time of night. I get to relax. The household is asleep. The dogs are actually crashed out. Either that or I'm going to get a wet nose in my ear in a minute. And I get to do my thing. I get to do research. I get to take things to pieces. This lab space that you see bits of it behind you, I'll fire up bits. I've got a computer over here that I actually plug my brain into. I've got an EEG sensor system that's sitting over here that I actually put it on, and it's tracking certain things. And I'm actually working on some interesting stuff on like passwordless, literally passwordless. In other words, using us as the human as the authentication method. It's just fun stuff I'm messing around with. I'll do something with it one day. Basically, I'm trying to hack the human themselves. So honestly, my biggest problem is not what's keeping me up at night. It's purely, how do I actually shut my brain down? I have a real bad problem. I'm like taking melatonin every evening just to try to train it to calm down. But if there was stuff I'm scared about, I think it's our own industry. I'm scared for our own industry. We as security people have one job. That's it. We don't have, nothing else matters. We have one job and one job only. And that's to protect. That's it. Nothing else. Our job is to protect the people around us. Yet we've forgotten that. We are so focused on technology that we've forgotten the human. We've not only forgotten the human, we've also to some degree forgotten the process as well. But I think my biggest frustration and my biggest concern is we've really forgotten the human in all of this. And we've just gone chasing down technology in the hopes that it fixes everything. And quite honestly, it's not going to. And so many and so few companies out there are willing to admit that technology isn't going to fix everything.
So what do you mean by that? It's the human.
We've forgotten the human in several different things. Number one, let's face it, the easiest way to break into a company is the squishy thing sitting between the keyboard and the chair. Let's be perfectly honest. That's number one. And all we're doing is we're throwing more and more and more technology at the problem. We're confusing the users. We really don't bother teaching them effectively how to help themselves, let alone the families and grandma behind them. We have also, as an industry, we've gone charging down this technology will solve the problem, intelligence will solve the problem, augmentation will solve the problem, rather than, again, taking a step back and going, look, we actually have businesses that we're meant to be protecting, and we're doing a shit job of it, to be blunt as I possibly can. You know, we are losing more and more data, we're having more and more problems, we're spending more and more money. That equation doesn't work. So we have to take a step back and go, what are we failing at? And a lot of what we're failing at is we're being led by marketing, and we're being led by that inevitable chasing of the dollar, rather than literally taking a step back and go, what can I do to protect you more effectively? How can I help you? And that's really all it comes down to.
Okay.
We're just not doing that.
Well, actually, it's interesting you mentioned passwordless, because I'm looking at one of the questions.
Yeah.
And they have an authentication security question. It said, it's my strong opinion that we will soon regret the move towards frictionless, seamless, and passwordless authentication, because the something you know is the only thing that actually genuinely self-protects each of us individually, as opposed to the companies and government services we access. Sure, current passwords are broken, but that just means we should fix the knowledge factor, not throw it out the window altogether. Keen to know Chris's thoughts.
So it's interesting. I'm very fortunate. Ori and the team, and like Frank Abnegale are friends over at Trusona. So I'm helping them with like just a no password kind of a solution. There's some folks over at EthoPass that I'm also helping as well on some password stuff. And the machine that's behind me is taking an entirely different approach, which is, you know, me, the human, becomes the authentication, not my fingerprint, not my facial scan, not my biometric, my gate. The very human, my simple existence, becomes my authentication. So We have a long way to go. I mean, let's be honest. We're still fighting the fact that the most used password out there is 1234566. I mean, we're in 2020. You want to tell you one thing where our industry has failed, that's it. And so there's so much that we have to do. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. I mean, passwords, I think we're going to spend 10 billion on them this year on just that industry trying to fix the problem or deal with it. So we have to take a step back. We've got to do something different. And it's a challenge. And again, it's the human. So if I talk to the human, I need to understand why the human still wants to use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if they're being complicated, they add 7, 8, and 9 on the end of it just to make it, And so I've got to understand that, but I don't want to understand that. I want to throw more and more technology at the problem, as opposed to taking a step back and going, what can we do in the development life cycle, in the authentication life cycle? How can we be more effective on doing that? And no, fingerprints aren't the answer, and facial isn't the answer, because if I lose this, I'm screwed. Yeah. But if I lose my password, I can change it every 5 bloody minutes. But how do I tell the user that? So we have to do something different. Absolutely. Now, passphrases, they're a nice interim step, and all sorts of other things. But again, these are all interim steps. We need to go back to, the origins of this, the 60s and 70s and go, look, we got it wrong. How can we do this differently? How can we be more effective? Is it something where, to the really, really good question, which is, how do we create an identity for an individual that cannot be compromised? Or if it is compromised, who cares? Because it's only compromised for that one piece of the session or for that one packet. We look at, you hear the challenges over, well, quantum encryption will make everything redundant. Well, I call bullshit on that one. Because an amazing research group actually just showed how they can break quantum encryption. They can actually get in between the machine and the actual spin of the electron, and they can actually do some really funky algorithmic stuff. So the whole concept of it being unbreakable now goes out of the window. It's actually really freaking cool. And again, if an attacker does this, then the defense does this. So this is always going to be a one-step thing. So how do you build an identity that ever evolves, ever changes? Does it do it with a biorhythm? Does it do it based on all sorts of interesting human traits or something? We've got to do something better. Absolutely. That's an awesome question, though. A lot of the stuff that's out there I don't like. Let's put it that way. Again, it's too fragmented. Sorry. I'm going to go off on a tangent for 2 seconds. I did an amazing talk. I was part of a really awesome, like a sub conference at RSA this year. And again, it was put on by True Stone and some other amazing folks. And I'm stood up there and I'm giving a talk about the challenges in our industry. And then some dingleberry from a very large financial company gets up and explains how his pet project is going to solve passwords for his entire company. And I'm like, why the hell would you spend millions on your own pet ego project rather than take that money and go work with some of the companies that are out there to help improve their products and everybody's lives more effectively? It just, we keep fragmenting rather than going, let's consolidate and do it properly. Sorry, squirrels.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. We're all afraid of being hacked, and once our fingerprints and things get hacked, people are very concerned.
You're done, yeah. So, I mean, when you look at the facial issues that are going on in countries a little closer to your neck of the woods, there are challenges with it, but there's also the flip side of that is, if you think about what we are having to do to look after humans, again, back to this technology and humans, we're going through an amazing set of issues and conversations in the US at the moment, because obviously Google and Apple have said they're going to team up and they're going to turn our mobile phones into basically testing stations for us and for everybody else because of COVID.
Yeah.
On one hand, absolutely fantastic. Love it. Brilliant idea. But on the other hand, what the hell are they going to do with that data? And if we could actually go, hey, we trust you, then there's no problem. But that's the problem. We don't have the trust in our own systems. So yeah, big issues.
Okay, let's go to a question from Dave. Dave says, as unbiased as you can be, is deception something that is your standard, read boring, enterprises should be looking into? And if so, why?
Yeah, I actually love it. So I will be as unbiased as I can be. And if Dave wants to do the research, I've been fortunate. I've worked for I've actually, so John McAfee for a while actually had a deception company. I've actually got one of the boxes, totally awesome thing. I've done a Calvio, I've done a TiVo. I've obviously looked at everybody else, Trap and Elusive and Smoke and everybody else. Deception as a concept, irrespective of who you choose. Now, you should choose wisely for all the obvious reasons. But deception as a concept should, be a fundamental basics. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Because of how it works and because it does something more than just react. You have the proactive side, you have the preventative side, and you are really giving the blue team much more than they get from a freaking IDS, IPS, DLP, SIM, and HIDS log. So as unbiased as I can be, yes, I would say flipping build deception in as a box standard bloody. You'll notice NIST, ISO, and a bunch of the other frameworks are really starting to talk about it. So get your asses in gear and start getting on to the more effective side. Basically change the symmetry. Give the defense a little bit more of a chance. So all right, off my soapbox now.
Okay, we have a question from one of our Facebook Live viewers from a small business. Is it necessary for small businesses to look into cybersecurity? If so, what can they do? P.S. I am not tech savvy.
Splendid. I love that. Yes is the simple answer. Because if you are a small business, you have several things. You're either building up intellectual property, so you've got to protect it before somebody else steals it, preferably. Let's be honest on that one. If you're a small business and you're relying on any kind of technology to do transactions or to do integrations or to do interfaces or communications, if I can interrupt that, I will impact your business. So you have to do something, even the basics. I mean, it's simple shit. Patch, segmentation, separation, training, end user training. Again, for good or for bad, I'm now hanging out with the crew over at Wiser. So Wiser does online training. It's 90 seconds of video. It's freaking awesome. And it makes you laugh. So just simple stuff like that. Just do the basics. You don't have to go out and spend a bloody fortune, but at least get the simple basic stuff done. Do some self-education. Or, you've got a bunch of people here that they can probably ask questions of. You guys have got an amazing community out in Singapore. Lean on that community and ask them questions as opposed to just a hairy, scary thing.
Okay. From Perry, we have a question. A cashless society with human implanted RFIDs and digital identity, or money, credit, passport ID on that chip. Likely, and does this expose us to greater risk? Discuss.
Let's not use an RFID chip. Let's just start with the easy one. Let's take a step. Don't use RFID. I've got my RFID scanner up there. Much fun to be had. We're doing it now with contactless payment systems. So there's all sorts of interesting stuff on the cryptos and the ciphers and all sorts of other stuff. Will we get to a cashless society? I don't know. That's going to be interesting. You think about it. Again, you look at the
14 years old, you took your dad's bank account, right? And so
but it was attached to it was on a mainframe that was attached to a modem that was attached to the public network. It wasn't really even the internet back then. I war dialed, for crying out loud. I literally figured out what all the telephone numbers were in my area, built basically a batch file and war dialed the bloody things until I got the mainframe to respond. I think we will. I think we're going to move towards it. It's interesting. I've done a bunch of stuff, obviously, in the cryptocurrency and the cipher world for a long, many, many years. That is more volatile than I think many organizations can stand. But if a country or a series of countries, and quite honestly, I think it's going to come from like the Singapore, China area. Let's be perfectly honest. You guys are so freaking far and ahead when it comes to mobile computing, mobile apps and everything else. You could teach this country more than a thing or two. Let's be perfectly honest. So I think it's something like that is definitely going to happen. I don't think it's going to replace solid hard currency, at least in my lifetime, but it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But I think we need to protect it more effectively than an embedded chip. Embedded chips aren't, we got to do something.
Okay. A question from either Ale or Ale. For companies
like
that
Ale. Good Ale.
Okay, Ale. For companies that do not have a CISO or industries that lack the security awareness, how do you convince them to start taking cybersecurity seriously? What have you experienced that works?
I think, it comes to a risk conversation. I've been very lucky to sit down in a lot of smaller companies over the years, and quite honestly, my first question typically, and again, so you need the audience, you need the buy-in from leadership. So if they don't understand it, your first conversation has to be, how can I help you understand the world that I live in? And then I can relate it to the world that you live in. So if you're talking to a manufacturing company, I actually obviously have to understand how the greasy bits work, how the crazy bits work, and how the manufacturing and the processing all the way through the supply chain works. If I can understand that, I can have a good conversation. So now I can talk about risks. I can talk about supply chain risks. I can talk about manufacturing risks on SCADA systems. I can talk about transportation risks. I can talk about human capital risks. I can talk about intellectual property risks. So we, the security people, have to actually go in and understand the very businesses we're communicating with. That's number one. Number two, when you go in, you're only going to, it's the elevator pitch. You're going to get 30 seconds to talk to the CEO and help them understand what risk is from your eyes. So what I typically do is when I'll go in, I'll have the conversation. I'm like, look, how could I shut you down? What one thing could I do that would shut you down tomorrow? And it's really interesting because the CEO will typically go, well, it's a financial risk. The finance guy goes, well, actually, if the money market goes to hell, we're in problems. The manufacturing person says, you throw like a handful of sand into my machine, we're screwed. The person who's doing design says, hey, if I lose my intellectual property, we're out of business. So now you've got four people and you can have conversations around what the risks are. From the finance person, I can escrow their bank account and take their information because they're probably using a different password. For the manufacturing person, that's physical security we're now talking about. What do they have with cameras and surveillance and systems and recovery? For the guy who's, the lady who's running the development system, how well protected are they and how well encrypted is the data? So you can very quickly help a company understand how can you take them down in 30 seconds flat, and then how do you help protect and reduce those risks? So that to me is that conversation.
Okay.
The other angle, and it's tough because your other angle is, look, just go read the bloody news because it's all over the news. But I hate doing that because that's selling with FUD. It's fear. It's that you'll get taken out tomorrow by the guy with the matrix in the background. No, you might not. You might just be one of the lucky ones that never gets your ass handed to you. The chances of that are round about zero, but we'll play nice. So a lot of the times it's like, look, something is going to happen. What are you going to do about it? That's the other conversation I have as well with a lot of people, especially if you look at the mean time to discovery. Again, you look at deception, it takes that risk down. On average, I can get into a company and I can spend, global average is 197 days before somebody knows that I'm inside that organization. So what the hell are you going to do to understand that risk? And then when you have figured out that I'm creeping around, what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. How are you going to get me out? And how are you going to recover? And you can have those conversations. Again, to me, that's tabletop. I don't want to go in and pen test. Quit that shit. Pen testing isn't going to be effective in helping a company understand. Sitting down with them, collaborating with them on a tabletop exercise to help them explain and understand the risks, you're going to get a whole bunch of people who are going to be like, oh, hell yeah, I want to learn more. So that's where a lot of it comes in as well. Again, it's communication.
Okay. A question from Paul. Cybersecurity is so complex, complicated, and confusing that it must be almost impossible for an SME that doesn't have a big dedicated IT department to know what to buy and use. Are MSSPs the way to go for any SME?
Yeah. So and perfectly stated question, like seriously freaking awesome question. Because they're right. 20 years ago, it was like, I buy a firewall, I buy an IDS, and I cross my fingers. Nowadays, it's like, where the heck do I start? Yes, logically, an MSP, MSSP is probably the best place because at that point, they become your advocate. I mean, if you think about it logically, I mean, I don't know everything, but I have a lot of people around me who I can ask questions of. And so if you are inside a company and you have to understand the entire security stack, you won't do it because then you can't do your job. You need that trusted partner, and bloody hell, you better pick carefully and you better ask all the right sodding questions. I am more than happy to put an entire blog post out over all the nasty ass questions you need to ask them, because you need that trusted partner. When you turn and say, look, I need to roll something out to my endpoints, you don't want them coming to you going, oh, we'll just use CrowdStrike because it's perfect and the best. You're like, bullshit, actually. Let's have a conversation over who might be better in your situation. oh, you always have to go buy Juniper. No, actually, maybe not. Let's look at 6 other firewalls from Fortinet to FortiGate to Palo Alto and all to Checkpoint. Let's look at all of these ones because there might be a better one for your situation. So you need to find out MSSP or MSP, whatever you want to call the acronym these days, that's willing to fight for you, not just for the biggest kickback they're going to get from the vendor. That's the tough question. So yeah, you can't do it all. Get yourself and surround yourself with people who you can trust. I think I've just insulted half the industry in that one sentence, didn't I? Yes. I insulted the president. I've done good. I've got I need a little tick list. Pissed off the president, annoyed half the people. That's good. We're doing good so far. It's all. Sorry. If anybody was looking for a politically correct conversation, this was not where they should have been.
No, I think that the ICE71 community is really appreciative of your, honest insights, and I think everyone's enjoying themselves at the same time.
Good. We've got whiskey. We keep going. This is fun.
Yeah. So let's see. Okay, a question from Tam. Hi, Chris. What's your view on application of machine learning in cybersecurity? Would that be inevitable in the future, or just another hype? What could be the best use cases for machine learning in cybersecurity, which you think would be dominant in the near future? Thanks.
Oy vey. That's a fun one. All right. So I will be very upfront on this one. One of the companies that I'm actually in conversation with is as nice as I can put it. They're like an anti-AI company. What they do is they will go out and on behalf of clients and customers, they will look at the solution that you are implementing that's meant to be actually intelligent, and they will help you understand the constraints of it, help you understand that maybe where you've built machine learning properly or where you haven't built your algorithms, you're using natural processing as opposed to, and all the other, they're amazing. Calypso AI is the freaking great. Smaller team, definitely come out of some very interesting corners of Washington, D.C., but just really, really freaking good people. And what I love about what they're doing is they're trying to bring an honesty to what we are seeing in the industry. Again, it's another buzzword. But the flip side is if it's done properly, if you look at augmented, so let's take augmented intelligence, which is where like SOAR technology is. So SOAR, security orchestration. So in other words, you're on the blue team, you're looking at 100 screens and 1,000 error logs coming into you every minute. You can't fix that. You can't deal with that shit. So you need a technology that can come in and help you basically bubble up to the surface what you really need to take a look at, and maybe even actually deal with some of the easy stuff for you. So what they're looking at doing is testing some of the SOAR technologies and going, look, this is what it works and this is where it doesn't work. And by the way, this is how it can be influenced. So there definitely is a place for an augmented and possibly actual intelligence system go forward. No two ways about it. My frustration, I think, with a lot of our industry is, again, they've leapt on this. The marketing teams have leapt onto this. Oh, we have AI. No, you don't. What you have is a set of instructions that tell you to go from point A and go to point B, and maybe you've put some guardrails so it doesn't fall off the ruddy edges. You've given it fuzzy capability. That's all you've done. That's not freaking AI. AI is when your computer wakes up in the morning, demands a cup of tea, refuses to get out of bed, tells you you smell because you haven't brushed your teeth, and then maybe wants to negotiate over it's raining out there, do I really have to do my work? That's when you've got actual AI. Anything else is just marketing BS, to be perfectly honest. Sorry, that is, again, this is the problem with a lot of the problem with our industry. We leap on these buzzwords and we don't fully understand it. And this, the Calypso folks are really freaking good because they will, back to that trusted partner, they will go as the trusted partner for the company that's looking at the technology and go, actually, what you're buying isn't AI. It's maybe an augmented system, or it's this, or it may be an actual true intelligent system, but these are the constraints because you don't rebuild your model, because you don't bring enough data in, or. I got a love for those guys. They're totally awesome folks. All right, sorry, squirrels. I love these questions are awesome. I love the questions. Totally good questions.
Okay, this is from Rubens. Hi, Chris. Thanks for the great talk. How do you see the huge growth in the number of workloads companies are facing versus the lack of talent with security qualifications? Automation is always the first shot, but it feels like focusing on automation without looking into other topics like using the tech already available, as you just said, seems short-sighted. Any insights to CISOs dealing with this issue as well?
Yeah, that's a heck of a question. I had to find it because I'm like, there's so much stuff I want to put in there.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's get a couple of things. Again, I'll reflect back on some amazing conversations I've had. There's an argument to say we're actually looking in the wrong place and in the wrong places for the people. So let's start with that one. Why do we keep looking for people with qualifications? Why do we keep going, oh, you have to have a CISP or a CEH or screw the acronym. I care about the person. What I want to see is that person is willing to learn. I will take the time to train that person, but I need to know that that human is somebody who's maybe is going to be effective in a blue team, is going to be effective in an incident response team. That's the human. I don't care about what they know because I can teach that to them. And I think this is where I had an amazing conversation with somebody else. And we talked about apprenticeships. Why are we not doing more of that? Why are we not? Because we know we don't have enough people. Why don't we carve out some of the time? Yes, we don't have enough time as it is, but carve it out because long-term it pays dividends. Carve out some time and actually start to bring people in as apprentices. Pay them a decent wage to get them started. You get the loyalty there. Train them, bring them up, help them, retain them through basically increasing the pay. And that way you get that person how you want that person. And I think we don't do that. What we do is we go and we look at it on the job boards and go, oh my gosh, there's millions of jobs and we're all screwed. But we don't take a step back. Look at how many people have lost their jobs in the entertainment industry, in all of the retails, the hotel. There's millions of people now that are like, holy shit, I can't put food on my table. Why don't we go out there, grab some of those people, interview them, work through them and go, look, you've got in England and Scotland, it's called the nous. You have the way of thinking that we could train you and work with you, and train the heck up with that person and bring them in that way. Just so much easier to do. Yes, we hook up to universities, we hook up to schools, we've got the K through education stuff. There's some amazing STEM stuff that's focused on, everybody from race, creed, color, or whatever. There's some amazing stuff there. And I love the fact it's bringing some amazing people in, but it's probably not enough people. And I think as well, we're not looking in the right places. I also want the diversity of thought. That's the other thing I want it as well. This is why I love Jesse, the friend that's part of one of my research companies. He's an electrical and engineering mechanic. I mean, this guy builds hit and miss engines from the late 1800s. He has 6 acres and has a bunch of bloody chickens and other things on his land. Yet he's probably the smartest freaking person who wears overalls that I've ever known. He and I together have hacked helicopters, we've hacked ships, we've hacked trains, we've hacked everything because I've collaborated with him because he brings a different way of thinking. And I think that's the other thing. We don't need to be looking for more of us. We need to be looking for that diverse thought. And that's diverse thought across everything, race, creed, color, religion. I don't care who the hell you are. If you've got a brain that works effectively and we can use you, come in and let's train the hell out of you. So anyway, I'll get off that soapbox, but yeah.
Okay, I just want to be mindful of time. Yeah, if you're okay, I will extend it a little bit.
Keep going. Yeah, I'm good
more,
as long as you are.
There's so many interesting questions, right? So let's say next question from Asha. Could you speak to some of the risk in blockchain systems built with Solidarity?
Yeah, carefully, because I'm actually, again, another one of those side projects I'm working on. The Solidarity side, I'm not sure about. So the blockchain, yeah, there are definitely challenges on that. And I think part of it comes down to, a lot of it comes down to implementation. So how well has that chain and that architecture been implemented? And then obviously some of the biggest stuff on the difference between like a private and a public blockchain is how distributed is that architecture and that ledger itself. There's been a number of attacks, and Muggins here has been part of a couple of them, where we've gone up against private chains that are maybe only sitting on 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 distributed systems. We've been able to bring up our own systems, bring them into that architecture, and then literally take over the ledger authoritarian. And there's some really nasty stuff that you can do. So, and part of it, again, is if you look at how many companies and organizations are getting into it, how is their code built? How effectively is it built? How well protected is their code? How is the architecture system? And then how well distributed it is. So there's so much stuff in there. Yeah, that's an entire webinar on its own. I think one of those things that I look at on that one is go in with your eyes wide open. Who's got their hands in my code? who's got their hands in my technology, how many people have developed it, where is the development, how is it kept up? In other words, we all know that code's got problems. How effectively is it maintained? And then especially from the blockchain, how well managed and separated is that distributed architecture? And then who's got eyes on it? Can I bring in more servers? Can I bring in more? Also, yeah, there's some really interesting stuff on that one. So,
Yeah, sorry. Asha was just going to say it's solidity. Sorry, I misspoke. It's not solidarity.
That's okay. That makes more sense. Yeah.
Okay. How about a question on zero trust models? Effective in real estate? Practical in production? Is the firewall dead?
Make it go away. Oh, God. Deep breath. There is a person on LinkedIn who keeps trying to convince me that their zero trust company is amazing and it will solve all of our problems. If I ever actually find where they live, which I probably could do if I took the time, I would send them a couple of tasers and just say, please press the button. Here's my challenge. In theory, the concept of no trust is actually a really interesting one. But in practice, you think about it, again, go back to even a small to medium business. If you walk in there, let alone how many computers do they have? If you ask the next question, what software do you have? Who uses it? How often does that environment change? How effectively do you manage change? How often do you change users? How well do you let other people interact with your system? And there's a very, 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 very long list that just keeps adding to that builds a level of complexity into any kind of a zero trust system. The other challenge on some of that as well is what algorithm are you using for the decision making? So am I building a purely machine-to-machine decision-making system? In which point, how are you making those decisions? How weighted are those decisions? And then when you stop manufacturing from working for 10 minutes because the algorithm decided it was wrong, and the manufacturing person comes up with a ruddy great big spanner that's that big and threatens to smash your computer because of it, you roll it back really quickly. That's not effective. So how do you actually manage those exceptions? And how do you have the people to do it and all the other stuff? It's not that I don't like it, but I think it's got a long way to go before it's ready for a full production environment. Maybe in certain cases, like if you're building like a zero trust transactional system, so a financial transactional system, I think if you can actually restrict access to those certain areas, really nice. I like it. And the same thing with maybe some identity stuff. There's some interesting things you can do with identities and a zero trust system. But again, if you're relying on me to make a decision as to whether I trust somebody, me personally, that's not a good idea. Don't let me do it. I would actually trust a machine to make a better bloody decision than I do sometimes. So yeah, I think it's got a long way to go. I think it's got promise, but again, I don't think at the moment it's a be all and end all. We have a long way to go before this. Again, talked about honeypots, right? Sorry, we're scoring. You talked about honeypots right at the beginning. The challenge with a honeypot is it went into an environment, and let's just say it was a Windows 95 environment back in those days, or probably Windows XP, let's face it. It was a Windows XP, Windows 95. So you built your honeypot in a Windows 95 environment, and it looked pretty and it worked. But then the environment changed. Maybe it got a patch. Maybe something happened. Maybe instead of using PeopleSoft, they converted to Oracle or whatever. Or maybe instead of using all Windows 95, they converted to Linux-based systems. Meanwhile, this poor honeypot just sat there and went, hello, this is all I am, this is all I am. It couldn't evolve. And if you look at where deception is today, you build your deception technology, let's just say on Windows 8 or Windows 9, the entire environment changes to Windows 10. That deception goes, oh, please hold, it goes out, rebuilds itself, and comes back as a Windows 10 system. And so I think that's the big difference with any of those kind of theories in the security, especially the zero trust stuff. Until you build that adaptability into a solution that it understands its surroundings effectively enough, it's not going to succeed.
Okay, let's just do a couple more questions here. Let's see. Johannes says, Chris, you mentioned about 197 days of dwelling time in systems before detection. Many enterprises are deploying Splunk or Elastic indexing databases, files, and logs. What's your view on how to protect those platforms to surface visible yet undetected attacks?
So I think there's a couple of different things. I mean, Splunk, obviously, Splunk is actually pretty awesome. I've got a lot of love for it, but I also realize it takes quite a bit of love to keep it running effectively. So then you're going back to whose eyes, whose hands, and whose architecture is actually doing it. And the other thing is, as well, is if you think about it, again, as an attacker, I'm lazy, number one. Let's just be honest, I'm fairly lazy. If I can find your user ID and password in the wild, I'm going to use it. So Splunk is never going to see it because I just logged in legitimately as you. Splunk log's never going to bloody see that. It's never going to see the stupid thing. Neither is endpoint detection because I'm a legitimate user. If I've done my job properly, I know that you come in at, say, 7 a.m. and you leave at 7 p.m. And I'm like, I've got that entire 12 hours to do what I want inside the environment. And if I'm doing a really nasty job, I sit on your computer and I just watch you for a couple of weeks. I watch your habits. I watch when you log on, when you log off, where you log on, what you do. So any kind of endpoint, any kind of UBA is screwed because I'm basically following you. I'll deviate minimally just to try and get to where I need to get to. But yeah, anything from like Splunk or whatever won't see any of that. So that's, again, where you look at a deception tech that has to be built in top of that one. The dwell time's tough. I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, they're not just deploying Splunk and everything else. They're putting all sorts of stuff in. I mean, you got QRadar, you got Demisto in there. I mean, you've got SentinelOne, you got all these other things in there. But it comes down to all of this data that you're ingesting. How are you using it effectively? How are you asking it the right questions? How are you understanding what the deviations are? How do you normalize that data to then know what isn't normal? So all of this is where it comes into it. And again, it's not just a deception play at this point in time. There's all sorts of other things. And, you know, you do have to look at what's on your endpoint. You've got to look at how many endpoints you have. You've got to look at all these other criteria. And you've got to have somebody or a technology, back to the SOAR argument, that can basically sift out all the stuff you don't care about and really bubble up, hey, this is an anomaly and here's why, and here's the logic behind it, and how well can I drill down to that? So that's a lot of work, and not many organizations have got it done properly. You know, the actual platforms themselves, like the Splunk platforms and everything else, yeah, you have, it's the who's watching the watcher problem. So you have to have the technology that's watching your end users actually watching your security teams and the tools and technology they're using. I mean, when we break in, one of the first places we get double points. If we can actually break into a security tool and use it to attack a company, it's like double points. It's like bonus time at that point, because us, the security people, we should know we're the targets, and we should know that all the technology that we are using has to be protected as effectively as we possibly can.
Okay, so we'll just do two more questions. I know there's so many and people want to talk to you so much, but okay, Norden, with so much flack on Zoom now, what are your thoughts on it?
I'm frustrated. I think that's probably the nicest way I can put it. It actually really annoys me because a lot of us, when this first started to happen, when we started to know that things were going to go on lockdown, a number of us who reached out to the Zoom folks and said, look, your platform's got issues. We know it has. We haven't beaten the crap out of it, but we know it's got problems. We are here to help because you will be the bastions of everybody's truth. And we got, a couple of us got like a, hey, okay, yeah, we're in good shape. And then obviously all hell broke loose. And it's annoying. It's frustrating. It's not really surprising because, again, when a tool gains the notoriety, somebody's going to try and beat the hell out of it. You obviously have that. But again, you flip it around and go, look, there's some basic safety precautions you can take. You can put a password on the darn thing. There's all sorts of controls that you can or should have taken as an end user, or like you guys did as the organizers. There's things you should do to protect it in just a basic, simple form. And a lot of people weren't doing that. They were lazy. Let's be honest. We got a new tool. It got easy. We didn't bother with the security controls around it, and we got lax, and we got our asses handed to us. I will be honest, I still like Zoom, but I'm never going to have intimate or engaging conversations of a critical nature on this platform. I wouldn't do it on Zoom. I sure as hell wouldn't do it. I don't like some of the other ones. There's a very famous networking company that runs a very well-known platform, WebEx, that I hate. It's like a virus. As it drops on your computer, you can never get rid of the stupid thing. I don't like Microsoft Teams because, again, it wants to eat everything on the computer. It's like, oh, I want to install and I want to use 3 of your Google IDs and 2 of your Microsoft IDs. I'm like, get the hell off. Just give me a bloody video camera. No, the Zoom thing frustrates me. I think they should have and could have done a better job, and they should have done it up front, and they should have known, and they should have gotten and actually gotten ahead of themselves rather than waiting. Now, to their credit, they did put their hand up and go, and they actually have put their hand up and went, we screwed up. So I've got to give them some credit for going, we screwed up. We know we need to do better. So, there's credit where credit is due on that one.
Okay, and our last question for the session will be from Michael. Hi, Chris. With your very interesting background, what is the hardest lesson you've learned? What can we learn from it?
That's an easy one, unfortunately. Unfortunately, that's an easy one. Never, ever sign legal documents without having a lawyer, and a lawyer that actually cares about you. Having that lawyer go through the bloody thing with a fine-tooth comb. I'm still suffering through mine. So mine goes back to 2014, 2015. I had One World Labs. It was my company. I brought investors in, and I have an ex. I've done the married thing a couple of times unsuccessfully, and absolutely splendidly unsuccessfully a few times. And obviously, when we were married, I'd gotten the company, I'd formed it, so she was due her portion of the company. So the company drew up the legal documents to give her basically her portion of the company. I did not get a lawyer involved. I signed the documents. When all the airplane stuff blew up, I was already at odds with the board of directors and the investors. What they ended up doing was yanking back the investment money, fired half the staff on week one, and then literally a couple of weeks later, bankrupted the company. So I'm sat there with a company that I'd formed and had for 5 or 6 years that had just gotten taken into bankruptcy. The document that I signed, because the company told me I had to sign, survived the bankruptcy of the company. So I then had to go into a legal fight for, 2020, for 5 years with my ex, who we don't see eye to eye, over the fact I signed a document saying that I owe her near enough 800,000 plus US dollars on a company that no longer exists. I lost that battle. The investors reformed the company as Dark Owl, and it's still running, and they've gotten away with everything. And I'm left holding basically a very, very expensive note, which I don't have that money, because I signed a document without getting good legal advice. So that has probably been my biggest and nastiest lesson, and I'm still suffering from it. Simple as that. So yeah, never freaking sign a document unless you've had somebody really good that you trust look through it. Nasty lesson. Probably not the best way to end it. Let's end on a better note. I don't like that.
Okay. What's the proudest moment of your career then?
Awesome. Love that one. You know what? Probably two years ago. 2 years ago was the first time. So I have a daughter, amazing. I got 2 daughters. One, unfortunately, I don't see very often at all, and we don't really see eye to eye. And my now 16-year-old, 2 years ago, I took her out to DEF CON, which is the security conference in Las Vegas. And I finally got to show her my world and my family. I mean, because so many people in this industry, they're family to me. I mean, they're not friends, they're family. And a lot of this industry is really extended family as far as I'm concerned. So it was so freaking awesome to take her out there and basically introduce her to my family. That's probably my proudest moment, because I mean, I'm very, for good or for bad, I'm very, very fortunate. There's a lot of people I know in this industry. And like at DEF CON, it's like, 50,000 of your closest friends, basically, or 30,000 of your closest friends. And I mean, it was amazing. It was just so good just to introduce her to people who have heard lots about her, but had never actually met her. And so, yeah, that's probably my proudest moment, or one of my proudest moments.
Just that's great.
Yeah,
totally. I think a lot of us feel like that here at, like, for example, the SICW, the Singapore International Cybersecurity Week. When we walk in there, we feel like, oh, it's like a reunion. We're seeing so many people that we know from the community, and it's so nice.
It is. I mean, this is, yes, it's a job. Yes, we get a paycheck, and yes, there's things we should be doing. But what I love about it, and I think this industry is fairly unique. I mean, I've looked at a lot of industries, but I think this industry is somewhat unique in that instance, that a lot of us of that it is a family. I mean, it really, really is. And, you know, even with all the separation that we're going through and everybody's going through across the globe at the moment, there's so many people I keep in contact with. I mean, LinkedIn and all sorts of other forums that I want to check in. I want to make sure they're okay. I want to make sure I don't give a damn about selling crap to them. I just want to make sure that they're doing okay. And if they're not, what the heck can I do? Is there anything I can do to help? Or is it simply just, hey, like the big 6'3" hairy thing is just here?
Okay, well, I just want to say we've reached the end of our webcast today, but we're so grateful to you, Chris,
No,
for
this was
taking
awesome.
time
Thank you.
out of your busy schedule. I know it's later at night in Colorado, so we really appreciate you
Totally.
doing
This
this
was
for us and our
a ton of
community.
fun. Yeah, and amazing questions. Like I would love to take a lot of those questions and just try to answer a bunch of them if I got a chance over at some point in time.
All right. Well, we might take you up on that.
Totally.
But yeah, so again, thanks to Chris for taking time out today to spend time with our community and our I-71 Distinguished Speaker Series webcast. Also, thank you to our audience. Again, we're so grateful and happy that people from over 25 countries registered to be a part of this and to hear you speak. So for our audience, you can still reach out to us if you have any further questions about this, or if you want to join our community. Please feel free to go on our website. You can join our mailing list, our Facebook and our LinkedIn channels to keep up to date with what we're doing and to get more details about events like this. For example, our next webcast will be in less than 2 weeks from now. And the topic is all about investing in cybersecurity startups. And that will be with Michael Blakey of Cocoon Capital. It will take place on Monday, April 27th at 4:30 Singapore time. So you can sign up for that event on our website. And, until then, we hope you enjoyed our session. Stay safe. And thank you again for joining us. And have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me on. Absolute fun.